Margaret Hayes pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of Westbrook Concert Hall, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. It was almost 7 in the evening, and the last rehearsal of the day had just finished. She could hear the musicians packing up their instruments, their voices echoing through the high ceilings as they laughed and talked about their plans for dinner. She had been working here for 15 years now. 15 long years of mopping floors, dusting seats, and making sure every corner of this beautiful building sparkled. At 52 years old, her hands were rough and her back ached most days, but she never complained. This job had fed her children, kept a roof over their heads, and paid off debts that once seemed impossible to clear. The concert hall was her second home. She knew every inch of it. She knew which floorboards creaked, which windows let in drafts during winter, and which spots the evening sun hit just right, making the whole place glow like gold. But more than anything, she knew the music. After all these years of cleaning while musicians practiced, she had heard thousands of pieces. Symphonies, concertos, solo performances. The music had become part of her, even though she never spoke about it to anyone. Tonight felt different, though. There was a big charity event coming up in a few weeks, and the hall was buzzing with preparation. Wealthy donors had been touring the building all afternoon, writing checks and making promises. They walked past her like she was invisible, which was fine by Margaret. She preferred it that way. Less attention meant less trouble. She entered the main hall, pulling her cart behind her. The space always took her breath away, even after all these years. Red velvet seats stretched in perfect rows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. The stage stood at the far end, grand and imposing, with its deep burgundy curtains tied back with golden ropes. But something caught her eye. There, off to the side of the stage, sat an old upright piano. It looked sad and forgotten, pushed into the corner like an afterthought. Margaret knew this piano. It had been in the hall storage room for years, broken and unplayable. Someone must have dragged it out for disposal. Several of its keys were chipped, and she could see from where she stood that some of the strings inside were loose or missing entirely. She began her usual routine, emptying the small trash bins at the end of each row. The donors were still lingering near the stage, about a dozen of them, holding crystal glasses filled with champagne. They were dressed in expensive suits and glittering dresses, the kind of clothes Margaret had only seen in magazines. Their laughter was loud and careless, the kind that came from people who had never worried about paying bills or choosing between groceries and medicine. One man stood out from the group. He was tall, probably in his late 50s, wearing a suit that likely cost more than Margaret made in 3 months. His silver hair was slicked back, and he had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed to be the center of attention, telling stories that made the others laugh a bit too hard, like they were afraid not to. Margaret tried to stay invisible, moving quietly between the rows. But her cart's squeaky wheel betrayed her. The sound cut through the donors' conversation, and she felt their eyes turn toward her. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, hoping they would lose interest and return to their champagne and small talk. "You there?" The voice belonged to the tall man with the silver hair. It was loud and commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Margaret looked up, her heart sinking. She pointed to herself questioningly, hoping he meant someone else. "Yes, you. Come here for a moment." He waved his hand in a casual gesture like he was summoning a waiter. She abandoned her cart and walked toward the group, her worn sneakers silent on the wooden stage. Up close, she could see the man's face more clearly. His eyes were cold despite his smile, and there was something cruel playing at the corners of his mouth. "What's your name?" he asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about the answer. "Margaret, sir." "Margaret. Well, Margaret, you've worked here a long time, haven't you? I've seen you around." 15 years, sir. 15 years. He turned to his companions with exaggerated surprise. "That's dedication. You must have heard some incredible music in that time, standing in the background while real musicians play." The way he said "real musicians" made something twist in Margaret's stomach. The other donors chuckled politely, sensing entertainment ahead. "Yes, sir. I've heard many wonderful performances." "I bet you have." He walked toward the broken piano, running his finger along its dusty top. "You know what I think, Margaret? I think after 15 years of listening, you must have picked up something. Maybe you can even play a little yourself?" Margaret's throat went dry. She saw where this was going and she didn't like it one bit. "Oh no, sir. I'm just a cleaner. Come now, don't be modest." His smile widened, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "This piano here, it's about to be thrown away. Broken, useless. But I bet even on this terrible instrument you could play us something. What do you say?" "Really, sir, I insist." He cut her off, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "In fact, I'll make you a deal. If you sit down and try to play us something on this piano, I'll donate an extra $1,000 to the charity. What do you say?" "That's $1,000 just for trying. Can't be that hard, can it?" The other donors were watching now with barely concealed amusement. They could all see the joke. A cleaning woman, probably with no education or refinement, being asked to play a broken piano. It was entertainment for them, a funny story they could tell at their next dinner party. Margaret felt her face grow warm. She wanted to refuse, to walk away with whatever dignity she had left, but $1,000 was $1,000. The charity was raising money for music education in poor neighborhoods, giving kids the kind of chances she wished her own children could have had when they were young. "I really don't think I should, sir." She tried one more time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't be shy," another woman from the group chimed in, her voice dripping with false encouragement. "We're all friends here. Nobody will judge. It's just for fun." But it wasn't for fun. Margaret could see that clearly in their faces. They wanted to watch her fail, to confirm whatever they already believed about people who cleaned their floors and emptied their trash bins. They wanted to feel superior, to have a story about the simple cleaning woman who thought she could play piano. The silver-haired man pulled out the piano bench with a theatrical flourish. "Your stage awaits, Margaret. Show us what you've got." The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes were on her. She could walk away, she knew that. She could just shake her head, apologize, and return to her cart. They couldn't force her, but something in his smug smile, something in the way they were all looking at her like she was a trained animal at the circus, made her feet move forward. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was just tiredness from 15 years of being invisible. Whatever it was, Margaret found herself walking toward that broken piano, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She sat down on the bench slowly, her worn uniform dress spreading around her. The piano was even worse up close. She could see the cracked wood, the missing ivory on several keys, the dust that had settled into every crevice. It hadn't been played in years, maybe decades. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The donors behind her were completely silent now, waiting for the show to begin. She could feel their eyes boring into her back, could imagine their smiles of anticipation. Margaret closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her fingers finally touched the keys, and in that moment everything changed. Margaret's fingers rested on the keys, and she could feel every imperfection beneath her touch. 3 keys on the right side were completely stuck, refusing to move no matter how much pressure she applied. 2 more in the middle made no sound at all when pressed, their strings long since broken or detached. The entire instrument was out of tune, some notes sharp and painful, others flat and dead. Behind her she heard someone whisper, "This should be good," followed by muffled laughter. She opened her eyes and stared at the keys in front of her. They were yellowed with age, some chipped at the edges, others stained with what looked like old coffee rings. This piano had been beautiful once, probably decades ago. Someone had loved it, cared for it, played it with joy. Now it was just a joke, a prop in someone's cruel game. Her mind drifted back without permission, pulled by the feel of piano keys beneath her fingers. She was 22 again, sitting in a practice room at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Her teacher, an elderly German woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, stood beside her. "Feel the music, child. Don't just play the notes, feel them. Each one is a color, a breath, a heartbeat." Margaret had been so serious back then, so dedicated. She practiced 8 hours a day, her fingers flying across the keys until they bled. She dreamed of concert halls and grand stages, of her name on programs and in reviews. The future had seemed bright and certain. "Are you going to play or just sit there?" The silver-haired man's voice snapped her back to the present, sharp and impatient. Margaret turned slightly to look at him. His arms were crossed, his expression already showing boredom, like he was disappointed the entertainment was taking so long to start. The others stood in a semicircle behind him, champagne glasses in hand, waiting for the spectacle. She almost stood up and walked away right then. Almost. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of who she used to be. Maybe it was anger at being treated like a performing monkey. Or maybe, deep down, part of her wanted to touch piano keys again after so many years, even if it was a broken instrument in front of people who saw her as nothing. "I'll play something," she said quietly, turning back to face the piano. "But this piano is broken. It won't sound like it should?" "Of course it won't," the man said with a laugh. "That's rather the point, isn't it? But you'll try anyway for the charity. Remember $1,000 just for trying." Margaret nodded slowly. Her hands moved to the keys again, but this time she pressed them experimentally, testing which ones worked and which didn't. It was worse than she thought. Nearly a third of the keys were either stuck or silent. The ones that did work were so out of tune that they clashed against each other like arguing voices. But Margaret had played piano since she was 6 years old. Before life got complicated, before bills and children and death and debt, she had been good. Really good. Good enough to get into one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Good enough to win competitions and earn standing ovations. Her fingers began to move. The first notes were hesitant, careful. She was testing the instrument, finding which keys she could use and which she needed to avoid. The sound was terrible, just as she expected. The out-of-tune notes made her wince, and the dead keys left gaps in the melody that felt like missing teeth. Behind her, she heard someone giggle. "Oh dear, this is worse than I thought." But Margaret kept playing. She was thinking fast now, her brain working the way it used to during her years of training. If certain keys didn't work, she could transpose the melody, move it to a different range. If some notes were out of tune, she could avoid them, find alternative harmonies. It was like solving a puzzle, and somewhere deep inside her, a part of her that had been asleep for years began to wake up. She chose a piece from Chopin, a nocturne in E-flat major. She had played it 1,000 times as a student, knew it by heart so thoroughly that her fingers remembered even when her mind didn't. But she couldn't play it as written, not on this broken piano. She had to adapt, to reimagine it, to work around the instrument's failures. The melody began to emerge, broken and imperfect, but recognizable. Margaret's hands moved faster now, more confident. When she came to a dead key, she shifted the note up or down, adjusting the harmony to accommodate. When the out-of-tune strings clashed too badly, she changed the voicing, spread the notes out differently. It was messy and far from perfect, but something was happening. The music was starting to breathe, to live. Her fingers were remembering movements she hadn't made in over 10 years, muscle memory buried deep but not forgotten. Behind her, the laughter had stopped. Margaret barely noticed. She was somewhere else now, lost in the music the way she used to get lost as a young woman. The broken piano became just another challenge, like the difficult passages her teachers used to assign her. She had always been good at solving problems through music, finding creative solutions when the obvious path didn't work. Her right hand carried the melody, dancing around the broken keys with increasing confidence. Her left hand provided what harmony the bass notes could offer, working within the limitations of what the piano would allow. It wasn't pretty, not by any professional standard, but it was music. Real music. And it was coming from her, flowing out of her after years of silence. The donors stood frozen now, their champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. The silver-haired man's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The cleaning woman was supposed to fumble, to press random keys and create noise to give them all a good laugh before going back to her cart. But this was different. Margaret's eyes closed as she played. She had stopped thinking about the donors, stopped worrying about the broken keys. She was just playing, letting 30 years of training and natural talent take over. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her head nodding with certain phrases. Even on this terrible instrument, even with so many limitations, she was making something beautiful happen. The piece moved into its more complex middle section, where the melody and harmony interweaved like dancers. This was the part that had always challenged her as a student, the part where most pianists' limitations showed. But Margaret's fingers moved with a grace that spoke of years of dedicated practice, navigating around the broken keys like a river flowing around stones. One of the donors, a woman in a midnight blue dress, lowered herself slowly into one of the velvet seats, her eyes wide. Another man, older with white hair, moved closer to the stage, tilting his head as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The silver-haired man who had started this whole thing stood completely still, his face pale. He looked like someone who had just opened what he thought was a joke gift only to find something precious inside. Margaret played on, unaware of their reactions. In her mind, she was 22 again, playing in a small recital hall at the academy, feeling the weight of expectation and the joy of performance mixing together into something electric. She remembered the feeling of finishing a difficult piece perfectly, the moment of silence before applause began, the way her heart would race with pride and relief. Her hands moved to the closing section of the nocturne, the gentle, melancholic ending that always made her feel like saying goodbye to someone dear. Even with the broken piano, even with the limitations and the terrible tuning, she poured everything into these final phrases. Each note was deliberate, weighted with meaning, shaped by years of understanding what music could express. The last chord hung in the air, sustained until it faded into nothing. Margaret's hands lifted from the keys slowly, hovering for a moment before settling in her lap. She sat very still, her eyes still closed, breathing deeply. The silence in the concert hall was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the sounds from outside, the distant traffic and city noise, seemed to have stopped. Time itself felt suspended, waiting for something to break the spell. Margaret opened her eyes and stared at the piano in front of her. Her hands were shaking now, trembling from the effort and the emotion. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this, how much a part of her soul had been locked away when she stopped playing. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. She stood up slowly, smoothing her uniform with hands that still trembled. Her legs felt weak, like she had just run a great distance. She turned to face the donors, expecting to see their mocking smiles, their laughter at her presumption. But what she saw instead made her stop breathing. The faces staring back at Margaret were not the faces she expected to see. There was no laughter, no mockery, no cruel amusement. Instead, she saw shock, pure absolute shock. Mouths hung slightly open. Eyes were wide. The woman in the midnight blue dress had tears running down her carefully made-up face, her mascara leaving dark trails on her cheeks. The silver-haired man looked like someone had slapped him. His face had gone from pale to almost gray, and he seemed unable to close his mouth or form words. His arms hung limply at his sides, the arrogant posture completely gone. Margaret stood there by the piano bench, not knowing what to do or say. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. Had she done something wrong? Had she offended them somehow? Maybe they were angry that she had actually been able to play, that she had ruined their joke. Then, from the back of the small crowd, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, just one person's hands coming together, but it was steady and deliberate, not the polite golf clap of someone fulfilling a social obligation. It was real applause, full of genuine appreciation. Others joined in. First the woman in blue, then the white-haired man who had moved closer to the stage. Within seconds, all of the donors were clapping, and the sound filled the concert hall like thunder. Some were nodding their heads, others were smiling with what looked like wonder. The silver-haired man was clapping too, mechanically, like he didn't quite know why his hands were doing it. Margaret felt her face flush hot. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. For 15 years, she had been the invisible woman in the gray uniform, the one people looked through rather than at. Now all these wealthy, important people were applauding her, and she had no idea how to respond. "Thank you," she said quietly, though her voice was lost in the sound of applause. She gave a small, awkward bow and moved to step off the stage, back to her cart, back to being invisible. "Wait," the voice came from the entrance to the concert hall. Margaret turned to see Victoria Chen, the artistic director of Westbrook Concert Hall, standing in the doorway. Victoria was in her mid-40s, always dressed impeccably, always moving with purpose and grace. She ran the concert hall with an iron hand and a genuine love for music that everyone respected. Victoria walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. The applause died away as people sensed something important was about to happen. When she reached the stage, Victoria looked up at Margaret with an expression that was hard to read. Was it anger? Confusion? Margaret's heart began to pound again. "Margaret," Victoria said, and her voice cracked on the name. "Margaret, where on earth did you learn to play like that?" The question hung in the air. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again. How could she possibly explain? Where would she even begin? I used to study music, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A long time ago. Studied? Victoria's eyes were shining with unshed tears. Margaret, I've been the artistic director here for 12 years. I've heard some of the finest pianists in the world play on that stage. What you just did on that broken piano was... She paused, searching for words. That was extraordinary. That was the work of someone who didn't just study music. That was mastery. Margaret felt her own eyes filling with tears now. She shook her head, looking down at her worn shoes. It was a long time ago. I'm nothing special. I'm just... Don't, Victoria interrupted firmly. Don't you dare minimize what I just heard. Tell me, please, where did you train? The donors were completely silent now, watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Margaret could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her answer. The Royal Academy of Music, she said quietly. In London. I graduated 30 years ago. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The Royal Academy wasn't just any music school. It was one of the most prestigious conservatories in the world. Getting accepted there was nearly impossible. Graduating meant you were truly exceptional. The Royal Academy, Victoria repeated slowly as if testing the words. And you've been cleaning our concert hall for 15 years? Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. Why? The question was gentle, but Margaret could hear the confusion beneath it. If you had that kind of training, that kind of talent, why aren't you performing? Teaching? Anything but... Victoria trailed off, seeming to realize how her words might sound. But Margaret wasn't offended. She had asked herself the same question 1,000 times over the years. Life happened, Margaret said simply. She could feel the story wanting to pour out of her. All the years of holding it in suddenly becoming too heavy to carry alone. I was going to be a concert pianist. That was the plan. I had auditions lined up, managers interested. Everything was going right. She paused, her hands gripping the edge of her uniform to stop them from shaking. Then I met Thomas, my husband. He was a construction worker, not anyone from the music world. My teachers warned me that marriage would distract me from my career, but I was in love. We got married right after I graduated. I thought I could do both, be a wife and a pianist. And for a while I did. I played at small venues, taught piano lessons, practiced every day. The concert hall was so quiet Margaret could hear her own breathing. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were beautiful, perfect. But children cost money, and small venue concerts and piano lessons didn't pay much. Thomas worked so hard, double shifts, overtime, anything to give us a good life. Then one day there was an accident at his construction site. Victoria reached out and took Margaret's hand, squeezing it gently. He fell 3 stories, broke his back. He lived, thank God, but he couldn't work anymore. And the medical bills? Margaret's voice broke. I had no idea medical treatment could cost so much. The insurance barely covered anything. We had 2 small children, a husband who needed round-the-clock care, and bills that grew bigger every month. Oh, Margaret, Victoria whispered. I sold my piano first. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway that my grandmother had left me. That helped for a while, but not long enough. I took whatever work I could find that had flexible hours so I could take care of Thomas and the children. Cleaning paid well enough, and I could do it in the evenings after the kids were in bed. Thomas's mother would stay with him. Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring anymore what these people thought of her. Thomas died 8 years ago. The medical bills kept coming even after that. It's only been in the last year that I've finally paid off the last of them. The children are grown now. My son is an engineer in Seattle. My daughter is a teacher in Boston. They're good kids. They wanted to help with the debt, but I wouldn't let them. It was my burden to carry, not theirs. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the shocked silence from before. This was the heavy silence of people confronting something uncomfortable. Something that made them look at their own lives differently. The silver-haired man who had started this whole thing, who had called Margaret over as a joke, stood with his head bowed. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and Margaret could see that he was shaking slightly. I haven't touched a piano in over 10 years, Margaret continued, her voice stronger now. I couldn't, it hurt too much knowing what I had given up. I would hear the musicians practice here every day while I cleaned, and it was like a knife in my heart. Beautiful music that I used to make, that I used to understand from the inside out, and I was just the woman pushing a mop in the background. She looked at the broken piano beside her, running her fingers along its dusty surface. When you asked me to play, she said, Looking directly at the silver-haired man, I knew it was meant to be a joke. I knew you wanted to laugh at the cleaning woman who couldn't play, and I almost walked away. I almost let you have your fun. But then I thought, maybe just this once I could remember what it felt like. Even on a broken piano, even for a cruel joke, maybe I could touch music again. The man opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His face was red now, whether from shame or emotion, Margaret couldn't tell. Victoria was still holding Margaret's hand, and now she squeezed it tighter. Margaret, I need to ask you something. Can you come to my office? Please, right now. Margaret nodded, confused but willing. Victoria led her off the stage, past the silent donors toward the hallway that led to the administrative offices. As they walked, Margaret heard the sound of someone crying softly. She glanced back and saw the silver-haired man sitting in one of the velvet seats, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Victoria's office was on the second floor, overlooking the street below. Through the window, Margaret could see people walking home from work, carrying briefcases and shopping bags, living their normal lives while hers was suddenly spinning in a direction she couldn't predict. The office walls were covered with framed posters from past concerts, photographs of famous musicians who had performed at Westbrook, awards and certificates that spoke to the hall's prestige. Please, sit, Victoria said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair across from her desk. But Victoria herself didn't sit. She paced back and forth, her hands moving as she talked, clearly trying to organize her thoughts. I need to be honest with you, Margaret. In the 12 years I've been artistic director here, I've heard hundreds of pianists, professionals, students, amateurs trying out for our community concert series. I know talent when I hear it. And what you just did down there... She paused, turning to face Margaret directly. That wasn't just talent. That was something rare, something precious. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in the chair. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not like this. The piano was terrible. I made so many mistakes, had to work around all the broken keys, and that's exactly my point. Victoria interrupted, her eyes bright with excitement. Do you understand what you did? You took an instrument that was essentially unplayable and made music on it. Beautiful music. You adapted in real time, transposed passages, found alternative voicings. Most trained pianists couldn't do what you just did. Not without preparation, not without sheet music. You did it from memory, on the spot, on a piano you'd never touched before. She pulled her own chair around the desk and sat directly across from Margaret, leaning forward intently. I have a proposition for you. Actually, several propositions. But first I need to ask, would you ever consider performing again? Or teaching? Using your gift for something more than... She gestured vaguely, searching for diplomatic words. More than cleaning toilets? Margaret finished with a small, sad smile. You can say it. I'm not ashamed of the work I do. It's honest work. It paid my bills and raised my children. I know, Victoria said quickly. I didn't mean any disrespect. But Margaret, you have a gift that most people would sacrifice everything to have. And right now that gift is being wasted. Not because you're not good enough, but because life put obstacles in your way that you couldn't control. Margaret felt tears threatening again. It's been so long. I don't know if I could anymore, not really. Tonight was... I don't even know what that was. Muscle memory, maybe. But to actually perform, to play at the level needed for a professional concert, I'd need months of practice. Maybe years. My fingers aren't what they used to be. Your fingers just played Chopin on a broken piano and made people cry, Victoria said firmly. Yes, you'd need practice. Yes, you'd need time to rebuild your technique fully. But Margaret, the foundation is still there. I could hear it. Everyone down there heard it. There was a knock on the door. Victoria called out, "Come in." And Margaret was surprised to see several of the donors entering, including the white-haired man who had moved close to the stage during her playing. The silver-haired man who had challenged her came in last, his eyes red, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "I hope you don't mind," the white-haired man said, addressing Victoria but glancing at Margaret. "We asked to be included in this conversation. If that's all right with both of you." Victoria looked at Margaret, who nodded slowly, though her heart was racing again. The white-haired man extended his hand to Margaret. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm Victoria's father, though I don't work for the concert hall. I'm here tonight as a donor and board member. I'm also a retired music professor from Juilliard." Margaret's eyes widened. Juilliard. another one of the world's most prestigious music schools. I need you to know, Robert continued, his voice gentle but serious, that what I heard tonight was exceptional. Not good for an amateur, not impressive for someone who's rusty. Exceptional by any standard. Your technical skill, even after a decade away from piano, is remarkable. But more than that, your musicality, your phrasing, your understanding of the piece, that's not something that goes away. That's who you are. Another woman stepped forward, younger than Robert, perhaps in her 30s, dressed in an elegant gray suit. I'm Helen Wright. I own a music school about 20 miles from here. We teach everyone from beginning children to advanced students preparing for conservatory auditions. I would very much like to offer you a position teaching our advanced students. The pay is substantial and you'd have access to our practice rooms and instruments whenever you need them. Margaret's head was spinning. This couldn't be real. An hour ago she had been pushing a cleaning cart, invisible and forgotten. Now people from Juilliard and private music schools were making her offers. I don't understand, she said quietly. Why would you want me? I haven't taught in 30 years. I haven't performed in more than 10. You're just a graduate of the Royal Academy who can play Chopin from memory on a broken piano. Victoria interrupted firmly. Margaret, please stop selling yourself short. The question isn't whether you're qualified. The question is whether you're willing to step back into this world. Whether you're ready to be a musician again, instead of just the person who cleans up after musicians. The silver-haired man, who had been standing near the back of the small group, finally spoke. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. Ms. Hayes, I need to apologize. What I did down there was cruel and thoughtless. I saw your uniform and made assumptions about who you were and what you were capable of. I wanted to humiliate you for my own entertainment. He pulled out his checkbook, his hands shaking slightly as he wrote, I promised $1,000 to the charity if you would play. But that's not enough. Not nearly enough. This is a personal check for $50,000 made out to you, not the charity, you. I want you to use it to buy a piano, a real piano, the kind of instrument someone with your talent deserves. Margaret stared at the check he was holding out, unable to process the number written on it. $50,000. That was more than she made in an entire year of cleaning. Maybe more than she'd made in 2 years. I can't accept that, she whispered. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, he said firmly. What I did was unforgivable. This doesn't fix it, but maybe it can help you get back what you lost, what life took from you. Please take it. With trembling hands, Margaret reached out and took the check. The paper felt unreal, like it might disappear if she looked away. Victoria stood up, her face glowing with excitement. Here's what I'm proposing, Margaret. And you can say no to all of it, no pressure, but I want you to at least consider these options. First, Helen's offer to teach at her school is genuine and generous. Second, I would like to offer you a position here at Westbrook as our artist in residence. That means you'd have access to our practice rooms, our pianos, our facilities. You'd give occasional lectures, maybe teach some master classes. And when you're ready, perform. She paused, making sure Margaret was following. Third, and this is the big one, our annual charity gala is in 6 weeks. I want you to be the featured performer. I want you on that stage, in the spotlight, playing on our best piano. I want everyone who has ever walked past you with a mop in your hand to see what you really are. Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. The featured performer at a gala, in front of hundreds of people, 6 weeks isn't enough time. I'd need to practice, to prepare, to... You'd have access to our pianos starting tomorrow, Victoria said. Practice as much as you want. And Margaret, you don't need to perform a full recital. 20 minutes. 1 or 2 pieces. That's all. But I think it's important. I think you need to do this, not for us, but for yourself. To prove to yourself that you can still do this. That all those years didn't steal who you really are. Robert stepped closer, his voice kind but insistent. Miss Hayes, I've been teaching music for 40 years. I've seen thousands of talented students. Most of them have good technique. Many have passion, but very few have that special something. That ability to make music speak directly to the heart. You have it. I heard it tonight in every note you played. Talent like that is a responsibility. You owe it to the world to share it. Margaret looked around the room at all these people, these wealthy, educated, important people, and they were all looking at her with hope and excitement, like she was someone special, like she mattered. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all so sudden. An hour ago I was cleaning the stage. Now you're offering me jobs and asking me to perform. I need to process this. Of course, Victoria said immediately. Take all the time you need. But Margaret, please at least come back tomorrow. Try our pianos. Sit at a real instrument and see how it feels. No pressure, no commitments. Just try, Margaret nodded slowly. I can do that, yes, tomorrow. As she left the office and walked back down the hallway, the check still clutched in her hand, Margaret felt like she was floating. Everything felt dreamlike, impossible. She passed the main hall where she had played the broken piano. The donors were gone now, but someone had left a single red rose on the piano bench. She picked it up, holding it carefully. And for the first time in many, many years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that looked different from her past. Margaret stood outside Westbrook Concert Hall the next morning, the early sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. She had barely slept the night before, her mind replaying everything that had happened. The check for $50,000 sat in her purse, deposited safely that morning at her bank. The teller had looked at it twice, clearly surprised by the amount, but had processed it without question. She was wearing her regular clothes today, not her uniform. A simple blue dress she usually saved for church, her good shoes, a cardigan against the morning chill. She felt strange coming to the concert hall as anything other than the cleaning woman. Strange, but also something else. Nervous, excited, terrified. Victoria was waiting for her in the lobby, her face lighting up when she saw Margaret. You came. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Margaret admitted. I woke up 3 times in the night convinced yesterday was a dream. Victoria laughed and linked her arm through Margaret's. It was real. Very real. Come on, I want to show you something. She led Margaret through the building, not to the main performance hall, but to a smaller room Margaret had always walked past but never entered. Victoria unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was modest in size, maybe 20 feet square, with excellent acoustics and soundproofing. But what dominated the space was the piano. It was a gorgeous grand piano, black and gleaming, its curves elegant and perfect. Margaret recognized it immediately as a Yamaha, professional quality, worth at least $30,000. This is one of our practice rooms, Victoria explained. It's yours to use whenever you want. Early morning, late night, doesn't matter. I'll give you a key. This room, this piano, they're yours for as long as you need them. Margaret moved toward the piano slowly, almost reverently. She reached out and touched the polished surface, half expecting it to disappear, but it was solid and real under her fingers. Go ahead, Victoria said softly. Play something, anything. Margaret sat down at the bench, and the difference from yesterday was overwhelming. This bench was comfortable and properly adjusted. The keys were in perfect condition, smooth and responsive. When she pressed middle C, the note sang out pure and true, perfectly in tune. She began to play, not thinking about what piece she was choosing, just letting her fingers move. It was a Bach prelude, simple and beautiful, something she had learned as a teenager. On this instrument, with all the keys working and every note in tune, the music flowed like water. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in a decade, playing piano felt like coming home. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then the tears came, quiet but unstoppable. Victoria moved to sit beside her on the bench, putting an arm around her shoulders. It's okay, Victoria whispered. Let it out. All those years of not playing, all that music trapped inside you, let it out. Margaret cried for several minutes, Victoria holding her the whole time. When she finally stopped, wiping her eyes with a tissue Victoria handed her, she felt lighter somehow. Like she had put down a weight she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I want to do the gala, Margaret said suddenly. The performance. I want to try. Victoria's face broke into a huge smile. Really? You're sure? No. Margaret laughed through her tears. I'm not sure at all. I'm terrified, but I think you were right yesterday. I need to do this. Not for the audience, but for myself. To prove that I'm still the person I used to be. That all those years of cleaning didn't erase who I really am. They didn't, Victoria said firmly. That person was always there, just waiting for a chance to come back. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur. Margaret kept her cleaning job, but Victoria reduced her hours and increased her pay, saying the concert hall owed her far better treatment than she'd received. Margaret spent every spare moment in the practice room, her fingers slowly remembering everything they used to know. The first week was frustrating. Her hands cramped easily, tired after just an hour of playing. Her technique was rusty, the smooth execution she once took for granted now requiring conscious effort. But slowly, day by day, it came back. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep but not lost. She accepted Helen's offer to teach at the music school, starting with just a few advanced students. The first day, walking into the school as a teacher rather than a cleaner, felt surreal. But as soon as she sat down with her first student, a talented 15-year-old girl preparing for conservatory auditions, everything felt natural. She understood how to explain difficult passages, how to help students find their own voice in the music. Robert Chen, the retired Juilliard professor, became an unexpected mentor. He came by several times to listen to her practice, offering gentle suggestions and encouragement. "You're being too hard on yourself," he told her one afternoon. "Yes, you're rusty, but your foundation is so strong. Give yourself time." The silver-haired man from that first night, whose name she learned was Preston Caldwell, came by the concert hall one evening. He looked uncomfortable, standing in the doorway of her practice room, waiting for her to finish a piece before speaking. "I wanted to see how you were doing," he said quietly. "If the money helped," Margaret nodded. "I bought a piano, a beautiful used Steinway. It's being delivered to my apartment next week. I never thought I'd own a piano again." "Good." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I also wanted you to know that I've done a lot of thinking since that night. About how I treat people. About the assumptions I make. You changed something in me, Ms. Hayes. You made me see myself clearly, and I didn't like what I saw." "We all make mistakes," Margaret said gently. "Some mistakes are crueler than others," he replied. "But thank you for saying that. And thank you for agreeing to perform at the gala. I'll be there watching. And this time I'll be cheering for you, not laughing at you." As the gala approached, Margaret's nerves grew. She had chosen 2 pieces. The Chopin nocturne she had played on the broken piano, now performed as it should be, and a Beethoven sonata she had loved as a student. She practiced them until she could play them in her sleep, until every note was etched in her memory. The night of the gala arrived. The concert hall was transformed, decorated with flowers and elegant lighting. The wealthy donors filled the seats dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. Margaret stood backstage in a simple black dress that Victoria had helped her choose, her heart pounding so hard she thought people might hear it. "You've got this," Victoria said, straightening Margaret's collar. "Everyone out there already believes in you. Now you just need to believe in yourself." The artistic director walked onto the stage to introduce her. "Tonight we have a very special performer." His voice boomed through the hall. 6 weeks ago, this woman was known to most of us as the person who kept our concert hall clean. But on one ordinary evening, we discovered something extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my tremendous honor to present Margaret Hayes, graduate of the Royal Academy of Music, and Westbrook Concert Hall's newest artist in residence. The applause was deafening. Margaret walked onto the stage, the lights bright in her eyes. She could see faces in the audience, recognizing some of the donors from that first night. Preston Caldwell sat in the 3rd row, and when their eyes met, he nodded at her with genuine respect. She sat at the piano, the same beautiful concert grand she had practiced on for weeks. Her hands shook slightly as she positioned them over the keys. The hall fell silent, hundreds of people waiting for her to begin. She thought about Thomas, her late husband, who had supported her music even when it brought in little money. She thought about her children, grown now and successful, who had called her that morning with love and encouragement. She thought about all the years of cleaning, of being invisible, of pushing down the part of herself that loved music. And then she began to play. The Chopin nocturne filled the hall, but this time it was perfect. Every note rang out clear and true, the melody soaring through the space like a bird finally released from a cage. Margaret poured everything into it, all the joy and pain and loss and hope of the last 30 years. This wasn't just a performance. This was a conversation, a story, a testimony to the strength it takes to survive and the courage it takes to dream again. When she finished the nocturne and moved into the Beethoven sonata, she was completely lost in the music. She wasn't nervous anymore. She wasn't thinking about the audience or her rusty technique or whether she was good enough. She was simply playing, letting the music speak through her hands the way it used to, the way it was always meant to. The final chord of the Beethoven resonated through the hall, and Margaret lifted her hands from the keys slowly. For a moment there was complete silence. Then the hall exploded with applause. People stood, cheering, some with tears streaming down their faces. The ovation went on, and Margaret sat at the piano overwhelmed, letting the sound wash over her. She stood and bowed, and the applause grew even louder. Preston Caldwell was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone. Victoria stood at the side of the stage, crying openly. Robert Chen was nodding his head, a huge smile on his face. When Margaret finally left the stage, Victoria hugged her tightly. "You did it. You were magnificent." "I was terrified the whole time," Margaret admitted with a laugh. "The best performers usually are," Victoria replied. "That fear means you care. It means it matters." The reception after the concert was overwhelming. Dozens of people wanted to talk to Margaret, to congratulate her, to tell her how the music had moved them. Several offered her opportunities to perform at other venues. One woman asked if Margaret would consider recording an album. It was all too much, too fast, but also wonderful. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Margaret found herself alone in the main hall, looking at the stage where she had performed. The broken piano from that first night was gone, hauled away for disposal. But Margaret could still see it in her mind, could still remember the feeling of coaxing music from its damaged keys. "That old piano changed my life," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear. "No," said a voice behind her. It was Victoria walking down the aisle toward her. "You changed your life. The piano was just an excuse, a catalyst. But the courage to play, the decision to try again, to be vulnerable in front of people who wanted to mock you, that was all you." Margaret smiled. "Maybe, but I'm glad the piano was broken. If it had been a beautiful instrument, I might have been too afraid to touch it. The broken piano meant I had nothing to lose. And sometimes that's exactly what you need, the freedom that comes from having nothing to lose." She turned back to look at the stage one last time. Tomorrow, she would teach her students at the music school. Next week, she had another performance scheduled at a smaller venue. Next month, she was recording a demo that might become an album. Her life had transformed in 6 weeks from invisible cleaner to respected musician, but she hadn't forgotten where she came from. The next morning, before heading to her practice session, Margaret stopped by the concert hall early. She found her old cleaning cart in the storage room, took out a dust cloth and spent an hour polishing the brass fixtures in the lobby. When the security guard asked what she was doing, she simply smiled. "Remembering," she said, "and honoring the person I was who made it possible to become the person I am now." Some people who heard Margaret's story called it a miracle. Others called it luck. But Margaret knew the truth. It wasn't magic that brought her back to music. It was survival, sacrifice, loss, and 30 years of living a life that seemed small, but was actually filled with quiet dignity and love. And it was the willingness, when challenged by cruelty, to answer with grace, to sit down at a broken piano and make something beautiful anyway. Because that, in the end, is what life asks of all of us, to take what's broken and damaged and imperfect and make music anyway.